Thank you, everyone. As I just previously stated, my name is Morgan Walker. I'm a senior patient labeling reviewer on the patient labeling team here at the FDA, and I'll be presenting information regarding the instructions for use, commonly referred to as an IFU, a content and format draft guidance for industry. Here's my disclaimer slide. I'm pretty sure you all have seen this over the past couple of days. The objectives for this presentation today include background information on IFUs, as well as content, page layout, and draft recommendations from the draft guidance. Now let's get into some background information regarding IFUs. Some of you may not be familiar with what IFUs are, so we provided a brief description. IFUs are a form of prescription drug labeling that are created for drugs that have complicated instructions or complicated dosage regimens that patients need to follow to safely administer their medications. They're usually given to patients at the time when the drug is dispensed. There are two key components regarding the content of an IFU. There are written instructions the patients should follow through the entire medication use process, and there are visuals that accompany the written instructions to help patients better understand and comprehend how to use their medications. Now that brings us to the actual draft guidance. The title is seen here on this slide. It was published in July of 2010 of this year, and the actual guidance can be found on the FDA website that you see on the slides. The purpose of the guidance is pretty much twofold. We wanted to create a guidance to help industry develop consistency with the content and the format of the IFU draft guidance, IFU documents when you're creating them prior to submitting them to the FDA. And the end goal is to help patients have a document that they can refer to help them safely and efficiently prepare a dose and administer a dose to themselves or to a loved one. The scope of the guidance applies to all CDER regulated products. We just wanted to mention that it is not intended for the bullets that you see here on this slide, such as some examples of those products could be blood collections or blood specimen products or devices or things of that nature. When submitting an IFU document to the agency, we highly recommend that a Word copy is submitted to the agency for us to review. A lot of times we receive PDFs and then we have to request Word documents be sent to the agency. The problem with PDFs is that PDFs are very difficult to manipulate. We can't add comments, we can't change text within the PDF, and if we try to convert a PDF to a Word document, the text and the orientation of the document, the visuals can be extremely distorted. So we highly recommend Word copies be sent to the agency, and once we receive the Word document, we provide comments directly onto that draft of the IFU. As far as the IFU's relationship to the PI, typically information from the PI in the three bullets mentioned on the slide is where you will get a lot of the information for an IFU document. In addition, there may be some other information that's not included in these sections that may be pertinent to be used in an IFU document, such as steps that may involve how once you mix a particular drug product with food, how will that look? Will it be a color change, a texture change? Things that may be aware of, the patient may need to be aware of that need to be included in the IFU that may not be included in the PI. So now let's move into the content recommendations that come from the draft guidance. Here you have, this slide was actually taken right out of the draft guidance. It includes the numbers. You see all the numbers 1 through 10, I believe. And they are reflective of the specific content recommendations that are in the draft guidance. And they can be found within the draft guidance document. The IFU sections are listed here, and we also have them here with respect to the previous slide, in the order that the headings should be presented within the IFU. And I will be discussing each one of these headings in the subsequent slides. The first part or section or heading of the IFU document is the title. The title should appear just as you see in all uppercase letters, bold, and centered in the middle of the document. And we have provided visuals for each one of the headings just to kind of better illustrate and present to you the content behind what's in the draft guidance. The product title comes next. That's the next heading in the IFU document, and includes the following information in this order. And it should appear immediately below the title of the IFU. It should include, it should be centered and presented in bold letters as well. And I have some product title examples for you all on the next slide. Here is our first example. This is a product title of a drug product with a proprietary name. As you can see, it is immediately below the title and includes the proprietary name, phonetic spelling, and information regarding the established name and the route of administration. We also wanted to provide an example of a fictitious drug of a biologic product, which is similar to the drug product, but as you can see, is slightly different. We also have a product title example of a drug product without a proprietary name because we review products with both proprietary names and non-proprietary names. And we also wanted to include an example of a product that had a transdermal system as a component, as we wanted to point out that the transdermal system is part of the name of the drug. Next, we have the next section of the IFU is the purpose statement, and that appears immediately below the product title. Here we have provided an example, and the purpose statement just you know how it's kind of implied. It tells the patient what the purpose of the drug is and the purpose of the IFU document. Visuals of the drug product. Here are some great examples of what the visual of a drug product you can include in an IFU document. The visuals clearly explain each kind of part, each component, anything that's packaged that the patient will receive when they pick up their prescriptions, anything that they will touch, any device parts and components. This is where you would include that information in a visual form of the drug product. Next, the next section of the IFU is the important information section. The important information section is placed immediately below the visual of the drug product, and it can include any critical information that the patient would need to know prior to preparing the medication or the drug product, or prior to administering the drug product. Here's we have provided some examples of the important information for patients. Sometimes that patients may be confused with the route of administration or the timing of the drug. So we would put a bullet in the IFU document, such as this one, for oral use only. If there's issues with when something should be taken, we can insert information like this, for example, where you would take the drug 1 hour before eating. Another example that we commonly see when reviewing IFU documents is where to inject the drug or where not to inject the drug, where to place the transdermal system, where not to place it. If there's any issues with secondary exposure, how to clean it, clean your area where you've applied it, where you want to cover things. Those are the types of information you would want to give to the patient prior to them preparing or administering a drug product. The next section of an IFU are the preparation instructions. And we provided the ellipses here because we wanted to show how we're moving further along down the document. So the previous information is not erased. We're just moving further along down the IFU document. So the preparation instructions are where we kind of started to go into detailed step-by-step instructions that we need to provide to the patients on how to prepare their medications. I provided on this slide some examples of preparation instructions that we commonly see in IFU documents. Supplies and materials are a big one. Sometimes I think within the industry, we just think about what's co-packaged with the product, but there are other supplies and materials that may be needed that the patient may need to be aware of, that they need to have in order to prepare the dose, such as a bowl or a teaspoon, um, alcohol wipes, bandages, things of that nature, things that are not co-packaged with the drug product. This is where you would put that information, as well as the other information that we have on this slide. Next, we'll go into some administration instructions. This is the next heading in the IFU. Again, this is another section where you would have very detailed step-by-step instructions to provide to the patient. As the example is shown on the slide, injecting my drug is a great example of where you would put that information. Here is an example, or some examples of administration instructions that would go into an IFU, and it would be very detailed. Like, for example, with an auto injector, there may have to be a push and pull or a pull and turn or twist function with an auto injector that the patient may need to be aware of, and you would like itemize that step by step by step within this section of the IFU. Now we're starting to get to the end of the document, the IFU document, and this is typically where storage instructions and disposal instructions are housed. So as far as storage instructions, this is where any type of disassembly, washing or cleaning, putting away, protecting something from light, refrigeration, it has to go back into the refrigerator, any storage instructions, this is where that would be housed within the IFU document. As far as disposal instructions, you would include any information here that would prevent any risk of like any accidental exposures or things of that nature, or anything that may harm the patient or someone within the patient's home. For example, certain transdermal systems, you have to dispose of them in a certain way, so you would include any of that disposal information here. We also have some other examples of disposal instructions. Any sharps container information that the patient would need to be aware of, how to properly dispose of sharps, auto-injectors, syringes, things of that nature. If there are any at-home chemotherapeutic drugs that have certain requirements, how to be disposed properly, that information would be included in this section as well. So there are some IFUs that contain a Q&A section or a what should I do if type of section. Those would be included, that section would be included immediately after the disposal information, and that would be the very last part or the very bottom of an IFU document. In addition, at the end of an IFU document, you would also include information where the patient can, if they have questions, there's a telephone number or a website that they could contact, any business information for the manufacturer or distributor, and lastly, the approval statement. This instructions for use has been approved by the FDA, and the date of approval or the revision date would also be included at the bottom of the IFU. So now that we've talked about content of the IFU, let's go into the page layout and page design recommendations. The IFU draft guidance has recommended the following sans serif style type of font to be used within the IFU document. The font size of the text within the IFU document shouldn't be any smaller than 10-point size font. With the exception of the bulleted information on the slides, the information should be no smaller than 8-point size font. The title instructions for use is the only place in the IFU where you would use uppercase letters. The proprietary name or the non-proprietary name should match exactly how it is presented in the PI, and we try to maintain that presentation between both the patient labeling and the IFU. All other headings within the IFU should appear in title case. As far as bolded text, the following bulleted items should be the only items that appear in bold type font. Um, we try to refrain from using a lot of bold or italicized or underlined text a lot within the body of the IFU because we don't want all the messages to be blared. So if there's key critical tasks or key components or key information or critical information that you want to highlight to the patient, you would reserve that information to be bolded or underlined or italicized. Other than that, we recommend just refraining from that and keeping the following items in bold so that patients can easily follow or kind of find the information that they're looking for within the IFU guidance. IFU document, excuse me. So the step-by-step instructions, this is really important. We recommend that the step-by-step instructions be sequentially numbered and continuous throughout the document. As you see on the slide, the step heading is bolded, and we like to leave that like that because it's easier for patients to find steps that they're looking for, and easier for them to follow when they're reviewing an IFU document. If the steps within a document are not numbered continuously and you have multiple sections within an IFU, it's very confusing for the patient to refer. If you have multiple step threes, for example, and you're telling a patient, okay, go back to step three, then which step three are they looking at? So that's why we recommend for for the industry to provide IFU documents with continuous steps as opposed to having the same steps mentioned in the document multiple places. The visuals for the step-by-step instructions, the key takeaway from this slide is that we want all the visuals to be adjacent to the steps so that it can kind of go, the steps correlate with the visuals correlate with the steps. And the visuals for the step-by-step instructions should be labeled alphabetically, such as figure A, figure B, or figure C. And that figure heading should be bolded so that patients can easily find the figure that correlates to the step that they're trying to take. As far as spacing within the IFU, we try to make sure that the spacing is not too crammed up, so you don't want your text and your visuals kind of on top of each other and all crammed together, but you also don't want the spacing to be too wide where the patient can get lost within the document. So we recommend that you just try to have a balance between the visuals and the text so that patients can easily follow the steps within the IFU document. The use of color within the IFU document. Colored text and color visuals are great within the IFU because it helps patients easily match what they're seeing on the document to what they have in their hand or what they have in front of them. As far as the text is typically a black type font on a white background. But I wanted to also reiterate or mention that, oh, sorry, I hear some background. I wanted to mention that with the reproducibility when you're reprinting the IFU documents, not everyone has access to colored printers. So when you're developing the colored text or you're developing the color visuals, just be mindful that it should be legible and clear when printed on black and white font or black and white ink and grayscale. You just want to make sure that it's reproducible. Again, I wanted to reiterate that once you go through all of the sections and the headings in the IFU document, this is what it will look like, at least as far as the headings are concerned. Of course, you have to fill in all the information, the product-specific information within these sections, but this is what the flow and the order of the headings should look like within the IFU document. And as far as next steps with the draft guidance, so the comment period for the IFU draft guidance closed back in September of 2019. All of the comments can be reviewed on the docket provided in this slide with this hyperlink. And right now, the comments are currently under review right now. And all of the comments that were placed on the docket are being taken under consideration to move forward to a final guidance. Here on this slide, the prescription drug labeling webpage has been updated, and it's also included our patient labeling specific resources. So if you have any questions or need any more information regarding instructions for use, medication guides, patient package inserts, you can find it here on this website. And now we have some challenge questions. Question number 1. And instructions for use is, and I'll give you a couple minutes because there's a lot, or a minute or two because there's a lot of text there to read. By a show of hands, does anyone think that the answer is letter A? Letter B? Letter C? Letter D? Letter E? Or letter F? Letter F is the majority here in the room. The answer is actually letter D. and the reason why the answer is actually letter D is because letter C is the giveaway. Generally the IFU is generally provided to patients when the drug is dispensed, not prescribed. Sorry, guys. No gift cards for anyone. No, just kidding. And challenge question number 2. All of the following are instructions for use headings except for, by show of hands, does anybody think the answer is letter A, letter B, C, D? See, you got to give me some credit. I gave you that one, letter E. So the answer is letter D. Holiday preparation instructions are not part of the instructions for use headings. So with that being said, we open up the floor to any questions. And next to our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Commander Morgan. We now have a panel discussion, and joining us will be LaShawn Griffiths, who is the Associate Director for Patient Labeling in the Division of Medical Policy Programs in the Office of Medical Policy Initiatives, and also Brian Pearsall, who is the Director of the Division of Medical Policy Programs in the Office of Medical Policy Initiatives in the Office of Medical Policy. Thank you.
All right, you guys have all played the game before. You know how it runs. If there's questions in the room, don't be shy. Come on down. I'm trying to fill time while Renu runs all the way back in the back of the room so that she can start reading the online question. You would have helped me out a lot if you would have got up and come to the microphones. But now that she's back there and nicely settled in, if there are any, hey, thank you so much. We'll start with a question here at microphone number 2.
Hi, thank you very much for your great presentation on the IFU. My question is, we have conducted human factors study on IFU that was developed over a year ago, and the font size that they had used at the time was either 8 or 9, and there were no issues specified by the patients with the font size for the most part, but thereafter the guidance came out indicating that font size of 10 is recommended. So with that being said, would there be an issue if we proceeded with using a font size less than 10 because our human factors study showed that they were okay with it?
Thanks for the question. It's a really great question. With respect to the human factor studies, while the patient labeling is reviewed with human factor studies, sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Our group, while we don't particularly look at the human factor study results, another group that we work with does, so that is reviewed while the instructions for use are reviewed and it's taken into consideration. The guidelines that we've provided here are what we would like to see going forward. So if the document has not been reviewed by the patient labeling team, it may be recommended at that time that it be updated to that size. But you also may receive a recommendation from another group, like internally when we discuss with that other group, they may suggest to us that based on the human factor study, it remain at that particular size. So all of those factors will be taken into consideration while we work together at the agency to review it. So we'll give you feedback. I can't speak directly to that particular product, but in general, we'll provide feedback when we review them and that'll give you your answer there. Does that help? Sorry, I don't mean to make you walk back up to the microphone.
Thank you. Yes, it does help, but the only concern would be right now is they're also in the process of developing the paper size for the carton, and so they've already kind of laid out in a booklet fashion, and in a way they were hoping that we wouldn't have to bump up the paper size and the font size, but obviously at the end of the day you want it to be readable by the patient, so you have to do what's your due diligence and comply.
Completely understand this. Appreciate that.
All right, can we have our first online question, please, Renew?
What is the status of the Patient Medication Information Initiative?
Thanks. I'll take that one again. The Patient Medication Initiative is actually on the current Unified Agenda, the Fall 2019 Unified Agenda, and it is proposed to be published in June of 2020. I actually know we've had a lot of questions concerning patient medication information, so I actually printed out the Unified Agenda, so I apologize for putting on my glasses and reading, but the proposed rule would amend FDA medication guide regulations to require a new form of patient labeling, patient medication information, for submission to and review by the FDA for human prescription drug products and certain blood products used, dispensed, or administered on an outpatient basis. Proposed rule would include requirements for patient medication information development and distribution. Proposed rule would require clear and concisely written prescription drug product information presented in a consistent and easily understood format to help patients use their prescription drug products safely and effectively. And once again, that is on the Unified Agenda and is slated for, as I said, June 2020.
Okay, and again, if there's any questions in the room, please don't be shy. Come on down to the microphones. But let's go ahead and go with our next online question, please.
Why do you recommend that the biohazard symbol be removed from the figure of the sharps disposal container?
I can take that one. When we're reviewing the instructions for use, if it is some sort of injectable, oftentimes the applicant will propose again, with the various figures that they have in the document, they will propose a picture of a biohazard symbol container and instruct the patient on this is what needs to be used to dispose of the sharps. And we recommend that that symbol be removed from that figure for the simple fact we have FDA cleared sharps disposal language, and in that language it gives alternatives to the patient that they can use if they don't have a biohazard sharps container. So we don't want the patients to read the IFU, see that this is what they need or supposed to have to dispose of their sharps, and they don't have it, and then they think that they have to go purchase it when we give them alternatives that can be used to dispose of their sharps. So we just recommend, just to prevent or decrease patient confusion, that they remove that symbol from the figure.
Okay, do we have another online question?
Why does the FDA remove page numbers at the bottom of the Med Guide, PPI, and IFU?
Take that one too. We recommend that the page numbers be removed. Again, these are documents that are intended for home use when the patient has them at home. Oftentimes, the medication guides or the PPIs and sometimes the IFUs are printed at pharmacies, different pharmacies, Rite Aid, CVS, whatever pharmacy you go to. And when it's printed, depending on how it's printing or whatever type of printer is at that particular facility, the page numbers can be different. And we don't want the patient to be confused that if I've seen them where the page number is 17 and I'm on page number 2 of a medication guide. So myself, and I work here, I'm looking for the other 16 pages. I'm thinking, oh, someone didn't give me something. So again, to decrease patient confusion, we recommend that the page numbers be removed because depending on how the document is printed, it can be completely wrong or it can be slightly off.
Add a little to that. Just to add a little to that. We actually receive that question quite often, and folks will say, The med guide I received started on page 40. Where are the remaining 39 pages? So it's kind of a common, and really what the other 39 pages are the prescribing information that preceded it. So it's just that the numbering may not be clear for the patient when they receive the document. And really our goal on the patient labeling team is to make sure that whatever we provide to the patients is scientifically accurate, comprehensive, and clear as it can be for the patient. And when we receive a number of questions like that, we take the time to kind of go back and reevaluate how we're approaching things to kind of reduce that confusion. So that's actually a really great question, something we commonly see. Thanks.
What are the sorry.
You were way ahead of me, weren't you?
What are the agency's expectations for updating the format of existing IFUs? For example, if changes are being made to a legacy IFU that is not formatted in accordance with the guidance, is there an expectation that the IFU will be reformatted to meet this guidance?
Thanks for that question. That's another really good question. When the guidance came out, we do anticipate that folks would follow that guidance, but we understand that there are legacy documents. Each document will be reviewed once new information is added and it's submitted with a subsequent submission, and we'll evaluate it again. If there is a reason for maintaining the appearance that that legacy document has, we can certainly evaluate that. But our goal here with the document, the instructions for use guidance itself, is to harmonize the appearance of instructions for use. We do recognize that there are certain products that kind of push towards using different approaches in areas, but we know that with consistency, that patients have better understanding, and that's across the board with our patient labeling. So that's why we're pushing to kind of harmonize the approach from content and format perspective.
All right, and if there are any other questions in the rooms, come on up to the mic, but let's go with our next online question, please.
Are there any differences in the IFU between prescription and OTC drug products?
For instructions for use, generally speaking, for OTC, we do not review the OTC labeling in this case, but for over-the-counter products, there's the DFL that's on the back, and that generally has the instructions for use for the patient, as well as the questions needed to answer for self-selection and use. We do not review that, and this would not apply to the over-the-counter products.
Thank you. Will FDA continue to request that the contents of the IFU be incorporated in full in the dosage and administration section of the U.S. prescribing information, in addition to being an independent standalone component?
Repeat that question one more time.
Sure. Will FDA continue to request that the contents of the IFU be incorporated in full in the dosage administration section of the prescribing information, in addition to being an independent standalone component?
And if I'm understanding the question correctly, this is asking if an instruction for use is created, if that needs to be housed, per se, within the prescribing information itself. When an additional instructions for use document is created, it is not required to have that placed in the dosage and administration section itself. That instructions for use document would be a standalone. There will be information within the dosage and administration. I see that Eric's joining us now. Section as well. But.
Yeah, so from just looking at it from the prescribing information perspective, the dosage and administration section must contain all the requirements of that and should be consistent with its guidances. It will differ from the IFU in several respects. Items that are only items in the dosage administration section of labeling is geared to the healthcare practitioner. There are certain things that the healthcare practitioner knows that does not need to be included in Section 2. However, some of those details would need to be included, more details in general in the IFU. But the Section 2 should stand alone from the healthcare practitioner perspective. There'll be some overlap, but the details from a patient perspective will be in the IFU. For example, how to dispose of needles. That may be something pertinent to patients, but healthcare providers should know that information.
Thank you so much, Eric. I know Eric knows a lot more about Section 2 than I do. We focus on the patient labeling. With that in note, the IFU is intended for the patient. We should establish that as well, or reinforce that, I should say. So those instructions are aimed at helping the patients out and not the healthcare provider. While they may help the healthcare provider, the intention is for the patient.
Okay, do we have another online question, Renu?
We do. We have a couple more. Would this guidance also apply to IFUs intended for healthcare professionals and not patients?
As Brian just said, no. This guidance is particularly solely for the instructions for use that, again, will be used by patients as a post-prescribing document.
Okay. Is it appropriate to present the headings in 2 columns on the page?
The formatting that we've provided has it in one, and that's for the information that goes into the prescribing information. I know some companies make a separate document that is placed inside the carton or container, and that may have a different format than what is attached to the prescribing information. Anything else?
Okay, our next question is, when submitting an IFU as part of an ANDA submission and the reference product's IFU is approved but not aligned with the draft guidance, should we develop our IFU to align with the reference product IFU or align it with the draft guidance?
Thanks for that question. That's actually a really good question. I can only speak partially to this because this is outside our scope, but I do know that with an ANDA, the requirements for an ANDA will require that it does have to be the same as the reference listed product, so you should be following the reference listed product. Additional questions concerning that or additional clarification should be directed towards the Office of Generic Drugs concerning ANDAs.
Microphone number 2.
Would you recommend in the instance where you have more than one, it's a little difficult for me to phrase this, but I know that if you have different strengths, you know, let's say you have a 200 milligram and a 300 milligram, I've seen you have a separate IFU for each strength to keep it easier. But in a case where you have different volumes, like a 1 ml versus a 2 ml, is there a way that you recommend to perhaps in the title differentiate between a 1 ml and a 2 ml, because there's also a dosing regimen that's different with that as well?
I think that's a very, very good question. With the IFUs, just guides and patient package inserts, we definitely have a statement in there that say take exactly as prescribed by your healthcare provider. If the different strengths or the different dosages, say it's a pen of some sort, requires a different way of preparing the pen or selecting the dosage or selecting the strength just based on strength or dosage, then that information would definitely need to go in the instructions for use, because that's important as far as how the patient would be preparing and administering the product. If it's one of those where it's a different strength, different dosage, but you prepare the device the same way, and it's really not needed except for at the top where we have the drug product name and the dosage and things. Does that make sense? Yeah. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I think it's I'm in a situation right now where I'm trying to foresee how to prepare it, because for the submission we're going to go in with one, but then down the road we're going to go in with another one, and I know at some point there may be discussion of whether we should merge them or just keep them separate for, you know, inventory and purposes of version control.
Okay. I think, again, just just from what we see, again, there's many IFUs, which is wonderful. We think, of course, the more education we can give the patient, the better. But I think when it's, again, if it's the same way of preparing, the needle, the same way of preparing, if you're opening a capsule and you still have to put it on the same amount of pudding or applesauce or whatever it is needed to administer the product. I think when you get into different documents, I think that can be confusing, especially when a lot of patients, most patients, you may start off at one dose and go to another dose, but everything is still the same. You know, the device is still the same. The steps that you're going to take is still the same. So I think when you separate them, it can cause some patient confusion. But as with anything, that confusion can be decreased also, but it's just definitely something that I think we all need to be aware of when we're making those documents, just as we're aware of them when we are actually reviewing the documents. We ask for, if you know us, we ask for samples quite often because we sit there and we twist and we turn. And if we hear it, if we're reading it and it says if we're supposed to hear a click, we want to hear a click. If you're supposed to hear a pop, we want to hear a pop. If it says turn the red button, I'm looking for the red button. Don't show me a green button and tell me to, you know, the text says green, but I'm looking at a red button. You know, those sorts of things. And I can be quite granular sometimes, and you know, there'll be questions or there'll be a statement where if you see a bubble, I'm so granular that if you tell me see a bubble and I see more than one bubble, I'm going to ask the question, well, is this broken? Is something wrong with this? Because it say I may see a bubble. It's different than you may see bubbles. You know, just things like that. And I just think it's things that we should all be aware of when we're looking at these documents, because people look at them, and it is important when we're telling them to follow these instructions to be able to use this product safely and effectively.
I just thank you so much for that, Ed. When I had attended these human factor studies and we worked so hard in developing the labeling, and then you witness the patients, they open the carton and they don't even read the IFU, and you're like, oh no, you know, they want to go straight to the device, and you're like, please read, you know, we put so much work and effort into this to help you. Thank you.
And on that closing note, that takes us right up to 11:20. So please help me thank our presenters.